They say the woods are quiet when no one's around. But what if the silence is just waiting for something? A place can feel off without any warning, like it's been watching you long before you ever stepped inside. Whether it's a childhood adventure, a peaceful hunting trip, or just another summer camp, sometimes it's what you can't explain that never leaves you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Night Terror X. Tonight's video brings you 3 terrifying encounters pulled straight from the shadows of forgotten woods, decaying cabins, and places where time feels like it warps around you. You'll hear the story of a weekend camping trip that went horribly wrong, a childhood hike that led to a house no one should have found, and a stormy night haunted by a sound no one could explain. These aren't your typical ghost stories. These are moments where the real world twisted just enough to let something else in. And once you hear them, you'll never look at the forest the same way again. So before we begin, make sure you smash that like button. Leave a comment with your creepiest true experience. Or if you've got a story that still haunts you to this day, email it to us at nightterrorxinbox@gmail.com. We might just bring your nightmare to life in an upcoming episode. Now, settle in. The trees are whispering, and something is about to find its way out. The Man from Hollow Shore. A friend of mine, Jake, told me this after we went camping last fall. He said, "Man, whatever you do, don't sleep near Hollow Shore. Just don't." I laughed it off at first. Jake always had these weird stories, but the way he looked at me that night, dead serious, it stuck with me. Anyway, here's what happened to him and his wife, Mia, about 3 years ago. It was late November, right before Thanksgiving. They were living up in Olympia and used to surf every weekend, rain, shine, whatever. Their go-to spots were usually Cannon Bluff or Lost Cape, even though both were hours away. But that weekend, the surf reports were trash. Waves were rough, wind was all over the place, and storms were rolling in from the coast. Still wanting to get out of the house, they started looking inland. Eventually, they found a quiet stretch of beach called Hollow Shore, tucked along the cliffs just off Route 17, near a dead zone with no service. The place was scenic, silent pine woods, cold, dark water, and a wide, empty shoreline. It wasn't on any surf app, but Jake had heard about it from a coworker who swore it had good waves if you caught it early. Sounded perfect. They figured they'd drive out that night, sleep in their SUV, and hit the water at sunrise. They packed quick and left before sunset, hoping to beat the icy night air. When they arrived around 4 p.m., the beach was practically deserted. Just them and a young couple in a camper van parked maybe 50 yards away. Mia said the couple waved, seemed friendly, normal. They cooked a quick dinner, stretched out by the water, and watched the sky turn gray-blue as the sun dipped. That's when Jake noticed something strange. A loud, drawn-out whistle echoing from the trees by the entrance road. He turned and saw a man walking alone down the gravel path toward the beach. Now there's nothing out there. No towns, no trails. Just endless highway cutting through dense forest. It's not the kind of place anyone just strolls through, especially not in November. The man was tall, wearing a heavy coat and carrying something long like a walking stick, or maybe a piece of rebar. He walked slowly, deliberately, and smiled as he passed the couple's van. They invited him to their fire, and he sat down with them. Jake and Mia watched from a distance, a little uneasy. Something about the man felt wrong, office. But they didn't want to be paranoid. By 8 p.m., Jake and Mia were zipped up in their sleeping bags in the back of the SUV, trying to stay warm. The wind had picked up, and everything was quiet except the occasional gust of air scraping the side of the vehicle. Around 9 o'clock, Mia cracked the door to get some fresh air and noticed something odd. The camper van was gone. No fire, no couple, no trace. She figured maybe they decided to leave early, but it didn't sit right with her. They were just there, laughing by the fire, not even an hour ago. Still, she didn't want to wake Jake, so she let it go. At 10:45, Jake suddenly sat up like he'd been shocked awake. Mia jolted with him, asking what was wrong. He didn't answer at first, just stared out into the dark through the back window. When she asked again, he just said, "Nothing. Just had a weird dream." But she could tell he was rattled. 15 minutes passed. No sleep. Just silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. It was faint, but unmistakable. Someone or something was tapping on the window behind Jake's head. He froze. Mia turned on the car's interior lights, and Jake immediately whispered, "Don't move. Someone's out there." Her skin went cold. They listened. Breath held. No more tapping, just the wind. A few minutes later, they both sat up slowly. Still nothing. Jake whispered that he thought it was time to check outside. Mia didn't want to, but the tension in the car was unbearable. They grabbed their flashlights and pepper spray, then eased the doors open. The night was dead quiet. Mia scanned the beach, seeing only darkness and the reflection of the waves. Jake stepped toward the tree line behind them. Mia waited, sitting on the back bumper, eyes darting between the road and the beach. 2 minutes later, Jake came jogging back, whispering sharply, "We need to go. Now." He said there was a car parked at the top of the entrance road, lights off, engine running, no movement, just waiting. In a rush, they threw everything into the back and jumped into the front seats. Jake peeled out fast, turning toward the exit. But in the panic, he took the wrong turn. He drove deeper along Route 17, away from the city. Not even 2 minutes later, they passed another turnout. And there it was, that same car, now with its headlights on, and it pulled out behind them. Fast. The road was narrow and winding, hemmed in by cliffs and black pine forests on one side, and a steep drop into freezing ocean on the other. Jake sped up, Mia clutching the dash, trying not to scream. The car behind them stayed close, headlights like burning eyes, just far enough to keep the chase going. Then up ahead, Jake saw a small dirt turnout and cut the wheel hard left. They slid in and killed the engine, holding their breath in the dark. The chasing car didn't stop. It blew past them down the road, never even slowing down. They sat there in silence for nearly a minute, hearts hammering in their chests. Then Jake turned the engine back on and drove, faster this time, back toward civilization. They didn't see the car again, not on that road, not in the rear view, not once. But here's the thing that creeps Jake out the most: the couple in the camper van. He and Mia checked the local forums a few days later, just curious. No one had posted about visiting Hollow Shore that weekend. No lost keys, no weird sightings, nothing. And no one ever came forward looking for that young couple. To this day, Jake swears the man who showed up that night, whistling, carrying that strange stick, he wasn't there by accident. He was waiting for someone to be alone. And if Jake and Mia hadn't been paying attention, it might have been them. The Laughing in the Pines. A friend of mine, Caleb, told me this after we got back from a trip to the Black Hills last summer. We were sitting around a fire, swapping stories, and he just kind of stopped, poked at the embers, and said, "You ever hear something that doesn't sound real, like your brain knows it shouldn't exist?" That's how he started, and the rest of what he told me still gives me chills. He and his older brother, Nate, had always been inseparable when it came to anything outdoors: camping, rock climbing, cave diving, you name it. There wasn't a stretch of wilderness in the western US they hadn't tackled. Caleb said being with Nate always made him feel safe, no matter where they were. But in late October 2019, that feeling changed. They had planned a solo hunting trip up in the dense reaches of the Red Creek timberlands, somewhere in the backcountry of northern Montana. It's one of those places you won't find unless you're looking for it, with dirt roads that twist endlessly into forest so thick it swallows sound. Caleb had hunted there before, but this was Nate's first time. They loaded up Caleb's old Tacoma, 3 tents, hunting gear, food, and enough propane to keep warm through the freezing nights. The nearest paved road was about 9 miles from where they pitched their camp. Just miles of trees, gravel, and pure silence. They got in late, set up fast, and passed out from the drive. The next day was like any other hunting trip. They spent the day tracking deer prints, spotting elk through binoculars, and hiking the ridge lines. Normal stuff. That night, they grilled up some meat, passed a flask between them, and turned in early. The wind had picked up a little, and the air was colder than usual, but nothing out of the ordinary, until Caleb woke up to something sharp hitting the side of his tent. Not like a branch falling, more deliberate. Tap. Tap. Then he heard Nate whispering his name outside. When he unzipped the flap, Nate didn't say much. He just stepped in, crouched low, and whispered, "Don't make a sound." There was something different in Nate's face. Not panic, not confusion, something deeper, like dread. They sat there in complete silence, barely breathing. Caleb said he was just about to whisper again when they heard it. A laugh. But not just any laugh. It started off high-pitched, like a woman giggling softly in the distance, but the tone didn't stay the same. It shifted, sometimes shrill, sometimes guttural, like there were 2 voices at once, overlapping. Caleb said it echoed through the trees, but it didn't sound like it came from a person. It didn't move closer or farther away, just floated through the forest, like it was circling them without ever taking a step. And then came the low tones, vibrations so deep it made the tent fabric hum. The ground felt like it was pulsing, like there was a speaker buried under the soil. Caleb looked at Nate and said he'd never seen him so pale in his life. They didn't dare unzip the tent or shine a light. The noises would come and go. Silence for a few seconds, then the warped laughing again, sometimes sounding almost playful, sometimes like someone choking. Caleb said the worst part was when it stopped altogether, and all they could hear was their own breathing and the crackling leaves outside. Then, just before dawn, it started raining hard, like the forest suddenly broke open. Caleb figured it would pass, but then lightning cracked so close it shook the ground, and one of their tents collapsed. The main gear tent was ripped from its stakes like it had been yanked. Not blown over, yanked. They'd hammered those stakes in with a hatchet. No wind should have pulled them out. After the thunderstorm rolled off an hour later, they didn't even talk. They packed up what they could, tossed everything in the truck, and left tire tracks through the mud as they sped back to the main road. Caleb said he tried to bring it up later. Nate wouldn't talk about it. He just said it was probably old equipment somewhere nearby. Maybe logging stuff. But here's the thing. They were over 10 miles from the closest trailhead. No houses, no stations, no businesses, not even a radio tower. and Caleb swears he'll never go back. When he told me this, he wasn't trying to scare anyone. He wasn't the type. He was dead serious. And he ended the story by saying something I haven't forgotten since. Whatever it was out there, whatever made that noise, it wasn't trying to hurt us. It wanted us to listen. Let me ask you this. Have you ever heard something in the woods that didn't sound human? Because if you have, you know exactly what he meant. The Hollow House, Beyond the Creek. So my buddy Nate told me this story after we went hiking in upstate Georgia last summer, and I swear, it left me chilled for days. He wasn't joking around either. His voice got low, serious, and he kept glancing over his shoulder like just talking about it might stir something up again. It happened when he was about 12, maybe 13. That was the last summer he ever went to sleepaway camp. The place was called Camp Black Pine, around 60 acres of rustic cabins, a couple of lakes, dense woods, and a lot of wide-open fields for hiking and playing sports. Classic summer stuff. They had this thing for the older kids where once a year they'd bus them out to a remote satellite site down near the Appalachian foothills. It was sort of a mini wilderness retreat. Tents, campfires, ghost stories, all that. Nate had gone the previous year and loved it. Bonfires, marshmallows, that cold concrete slab by the creek where everyone hung out late into the night. The land around it stretched for miles, rolling hills, patches of forest, and lots of untamed fields. The counselors were mostly chill 20-somethings, more focused on flirting with each other than enforcing rules. No one really noticed if a couple kids slipped out early. That's exactly what Nate and 3 of his closest friends did. They had it all planned out. Jackets, snacks, water bottles, and a crumpled camp map that was more decorative than helpful. At dawn, just after the birds started chirping and before anyone else stirred, they quietly crept out of their tent and crossed a narrow, mossy creek at the back edge of the campground. On the other side was a stretch of farmland they'd always been told was off limits. No explanation, just a rule. At first it was just overgrown grass and a rusty barbed wire fence half swallowed by trees. They followed the creek for a while, figuring it would lead them in a loop back toward the main trail later. But after about a mile, the water thinned to a trickle, and suddenly the forest opened into carefully planted rows of corn, neat, organized, and oddly quiet. Then came the man. He stood on a small ridge watching them, broad straw hat, denim overalls, boots that looked too big. He didn't wave, didn't move, just stared. Nate swears the guy looked surprised, confused even, but something about his posture felt wrong. When he finally raised an arm and called out to them, the boys turned and jogged away without a word. They didn't stop until they came to what Nate describes as a natural gate, an arch formed by leaning corn stalks, almost perfectly curved. Beyond it, the landscape shifted again. No more corn, just oak trees and a small bubbling brook. Peaceful, almost too peaceful. Like something from a painting in a dentist's office. Unreal. But they kept going. Why? Curiosity, maybe. Or maybe something else was drawing them forward. Nate remembers looking at his watch. It had been maybe 90 minutes since they left camp. No big deal. Still plenty of time to turn around. But then the terrain changed again. Sharp rocks, thorny bushes, a sudden steep hill that forced them to climb. They got cut up, dirty, tired. One of the kids even slipped and twisted his ankle slightly, but they pressed on. And then just when they were ready to quit and turn back, they found it. A valley. Quiet. Cold. and lined with trees Nate said he'd never seen before or since. Tall, almost skeletal, with bone-white bark and deep red leaves that fluttered without wind. There was no grass, only moss, and the entire place smelled like wet stone and old wood. At the bottom of that eerie valley stood a house, 3 stories high, completely wooden, slumping like it hadn't been upright in years. Glass panes in some windows still intact, others gone. The paint, if it ever had any, was stripped bare. The only solid part of the whole place seemed to be the stone supports under the front porch stairs, and the door. It was hanging open, just a few inches. It started to rain, hard, the kind of downpour that turns dirt into soup. The boys hesitated, but not for long. Better to be stupid and dry than wet and miserable, right? Nate led the way. The first step up the stairs felt like stepping on a soaked sponge. Soft, spongy, unstable. But it held. The entryway was small, just enough space for them to huddle in. A long staircase led upward, and though most of the house was dark, the storm outside cast enough gray light through the windows to make out the basics. They dropped their packs, took off their jackets, and tried to figure out what to do next. Maybe wait out the storm, then double back. Nate pulled out a compass, checked his snacks, normal stuff. Then, the sound. He described it as a moan, but not like a person. It was the kind of noise that rides the wind, creeps into your ears without direction. It seemed to drift down from the 3rd floor, or where the 3rd floor should have been. Nate glanced up the stairs and saw nothing, just shadows. And then footsteps, loud, thunderous, coming down fast. His friends bolted, no hesitation. But Nate froze, just for a second, long enough to look. 2/3 of the way up the stairs, nothing, no person, no animal. Just pounding footsteps on wood. Then something hit him, a wave of dread, like cold pressure all over his body. He grabbed his stuff and sprinted for the door. As he slammed it shut behind him, he says the wood felt wrong. Not like dry timber, but like paper soaked in sink water, mushy and fragile. He hit the bottom step and it snapped beneath him, splinters flying everywhere. Behind him, the house roared. That's how he described it. Like something inside had kicked the front door with inhuman strength. The entire valley seemed to shake. The next thing he remembers is running, non-stop, soaked, bleeding, slipping down the hillside, smashing through thorns and brush. He and the others made it back around 2 in the afternoon. The counselors never noticed they'd been gone. They lied, said they'd just gotten lost trying to find the old trail. Got scolded a bit, but no big deal. But Nate never went back to camp after that. He says he tried once, looked up that area on Google Earth, tried to retrace their route. But the satellite map didn't show any valley, no cornfields, no house, just trees, endless trees. He doesn't know what they found that day, but he dreams about it sometimes. The stairs, the moaning, the impossible footsteps, and that gate made of corn stalks that opened into a place he's sure wasn't meant for them.